Boker Tov and good morning. I'm Rabbi Steve Moskowitz of Congregation Lador Vador here on Long Island, and I am joined by my longtime friend and colleague, Rabbi Ellen Lippmann. Rabbi Lippmann is the founder and Rabbi Emerita of Congregation Kolot Chayeinu, Voices of Our Lives, a progressive congregation in Brooklyn, also here in New York. And we welcome you, Ellen, to the show. Ellen and I have known each other, we realized, since the summer of 1986.
Feels like
when
a
we,
long time.
it seems like a long, long time ago. We first met in our first year in Jerusalem at Hebrew Union College when we first started our studies as rabbis. So it's been a long time, and I have to thank Ellen publicly. You know, when I first came to New York, I was, I don't know, I just was completely overwhelmed by New York. And Ellen reassured me, said it takes 2 years, Steve. Don't worry, you know, soon you'll say southwest corner of different streets in the city, and you'll adjust, you'll be fine. And so I'm still here. So your advice worked, Ellen.
I'm glad.
So I appreciate that. So Ellen, thank you so much for coming onto the show. This is Monday Musings, our 15-minute spiritual kickstart to the week. And Ellen, tell me about the congregation. I mean, like your unique congregation that you founded.
Well, Steve, first of all, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be here with you. And I realized that you've been doing these on Monday mornings, and this is the last Monday of 2020. So, what a great time to be here together and see this hard year out together.
Yes.
And um, So as you said, I'm the Rabbi Emerita now of Kolot Chayeinu, meaning I retired a couple of years ago. But I founded the congregation now, I believe it's 28 years ago, in part because I was sort of searching for something that didn't really exist yet, and in part because I was being pushed by people who were looking for something that didn't exist yet. And I had become a rabbi, and they said, you should start something new. Uh, I also had some small ideas that I had begun to develop in rabbinic school about, this is going to sound funny, but it was the founding sort of idea of eating before prayer and before study as opposed to afterwards. Uh, because I found as a student rabbi that while people might sit quietly um, and a little bit stiffly through a prayer service afterwards, if you put a cup of coffee and some cake in their hand, or a bagel and lox and some wine, they came to life. And all of the stories of their lives came out, all of the joy of interaction came out, and I thought, why not translate that into a real practice? Why don't we do that first and bring that energy and that connection into prayer and into study? So that was the small idea. I gathered a group of people who and said, look, I have a couple of small ideas. What do you think? We began to develop them and to do very simple organizing of each one, bring one to the next meeting. And slowly we grew. So we had 8 people at our dining room table at that first meeting, developing what people started to call the coffee shop with a bima, or my original idea was for a cafe of some kind, and it grew for various reasons. It grew really into a more synagogue-like community, and now it has over 500 members. So it's been successful in those ways, and we don't do this now, obviously, in the virus time, but in-person time there. It's still true on Shabbat mornings that the service sort of begins with coffee and bagels and time for schmoozing. And it does, I think, have the effect that I had thought about so long ago. So,
Can you
uh,
speak can you speak a little bit more about that effect? I mean, what was brought to light? I mean, how did it inform tefillah, the prayer?
yeah, I think that. We don't always know how what I may think of as the spiritual spark of prayer happens. But I do think that one of the ways it happens is when the people in the room together feel a sense of connection to one another, not just because they know each other, but because they've had those minutes to talk together, to relax a little bit together, to share what's, if they know each other well, to share what's on the top of their hearts or most uppermost in their minds. And when they come in then to sit for prayer, there's a warmth between them. There's a little bit of relaxation because they've been able to share what was most troubling them or most exciting them or most worrying them. And I feel that all of that connection kind of adds to the richness of the prayer experience. It's almost like the definition that I think of as of a blessing. It's a little different than a prayer, right? With a blessing, there's the blesser, the blessee, and God involved in the interaction, and it's almost like a large scale version of that. That we blessees are sitting together in connection with the person leading the prayer and the divine presence.
And
So
that really, I'm sorry, that really resonates with me. I mean, I've often found that there's a certain impatience, sort of like to get, waiting for something after,
yeah, exactly.
services.
Exactly. I
So,
can't wait to be there and tell so and so,
when am I going to get to eat? When is my
Yeah,
bagel and
exactly.
lox? And I have also frequently said that some of the more important moments happen in the lobby of the synagogue or at the oneg. That's where there's the deep sharing,
Yeah,
in a way,
exactly.
and the deep connection between people, and the relationships are solidified. Or I discover something that's going on in someone's life. I kind of almost sometimes wish I knew before services started.
Right, right. Exactly. Exactly. And the food is, I mean, to me the food has never been actually the point. It's been what happens around eating together. That is the point that you're talking about because it can happen in the lobby without any food at all, right? And
Right.
and so
Especially on Yom Kippur.
place for it, yeah, by making a place for it or a container for it, it's able to happen a little bit better. And in our congregation, where people have sometimes joked that the tagline should be "Come as you are," meaning not just clothing or whatever you're bringing in your heart and mind, meaning also that people of a whole variety of backgrounds and possibilities should be able to bring their full selves and not feel like they have to check part of their identity at the door. And so that's also true in that space before prayer. That there may be Jews of color and trans Jews and a variety of LGBTQ Jews, actually, and as well as, say, intermarried couples, a whole range of people that may not always feel comfortable in other communities. That was also, I think, part of the genesis of our congregation. And this was true for my life. I'm a lesbian who went sort of hidden into rabbinic school and um, sort of pledged, I guess, as we were beginning the congregation, that I was not going to be in hiding anymore, and that neither would anybody else. That I kind of refused to have a place where people felt like they had to check an important part of their life at the door. So that's also part of the genesis of the community.
I do want to talk about your HUC experience, because it's, you shared a little bit with me and it had a profound effect on me. But I do, I want to just finish with this, talking about the congregation.
Sure.
What would, I mean, I guess what would cause someone to check part of who they are, or check their identity, and how can we make sure we don't allow that to happen?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I think that too many synagogues are very, very used to their ways of operating and to who their usual community has been. That may have something to do with
The regulars, so to speak.
regulars, may have something to do with the demographics of the place they're in, right? Um, and it may have something to do with some discomfort on the part of the regulars or the part of the leadership, at having people who appear different than what we're used to come into the space. And you and I got to talk a little bit about my kind of parsing the word welcome when we talk about a community. So try to say this so it's clear for people. I believe that all congregations should be broadly welcoming places, that everyone should feel when they walk in the door that they are welcomed warmly, that someone greets them, someone wishes them Shabbat Shalom or what, on a Wednesday morning, whatever it is, but that they should be fully welcomed. What I hope does not happen as congregations are starting to think about how to maybe open their doors a little wider is that they use the language of we who are here already welcome you, stranger, other, in a way that makes it clear that you are other and stranger. And so it's a good impulse that makes people say, now some years back, I remember seeing lots of synagogues and churches saying, we welcome LGBTQ people. Well, that's wonderful, but it means to me that all of you are not LGBTQ and that I am an other. And how am I supposed to then walk through that door? And I know that it's an unusual way of looking at that word welcome, but I do think it's important when we approach a new year, when lots of synagogues as well as other houses of worship are looking at ways to what I call open the doors a little wider. We've all had an awakening, and particularly in the past couple of years, we've learned in the Jewish community that there are far more Jews of color across the country than we white Jews might ever have thought. And so it's a very current question, this question of welcome and welcome. But for me, it certainly started with this question of welcoming LGBTQ Jews and others.
Yeah, part of what I was reflecting on after we talked, and just to share a little bit, it's the notion of these inclusion committees, so to speak. It's just what you're saying. I think it's simple but so profound. I mean, and it's hard to do. It's just, how do we make we wider? How do not we can never say you are welcome, but that everyone is a part of us and a part
That's
of our
right.
community, and
That's
that
right.
it's a we. I mean, for me personally, what I was reflecting on is that it's very easy for the rabbi to wrap their arms around the regulars, because that's who's there week in and week out, and that's who
We
you're
love
buddies
them.
with, and that's who your
Yeah.
friends are.
Yeah.
But sometimes by doing that, you might actually and inadvertently, you know, make someone feel less comfortable or feel like an outsider.
Right.
Um, he or she's not wrapping their arms around me,
Yes.
uh, and that's it's very important that everyone feels a part and everyone is welcome. I think we
Yeah.
have more work to do in
Yeah, and I
terms of
think,
that.
I mean, in the question of how do we do it, I do think that it starts with looking at ourselves on the inner circle, right? It doesn't start with let's go out and find those people, right, and bring them in. It starts with a kind of internal look of what's preventing me from giving that broad embrace, from reaching out as though I have my arms around you. What stops me? And I think, it's really important, in any of the ways that we may exclude people, to look into our own hearts, frankly, and to say, what is it that's making me a little nervous? What's keeping me from, just reaching out fully? And if the leadership of a community can do that, that begins the steps that can, that can lead outward and putting our arms around people. So I think sometimes we forget that part, that that we all grow up in the society that has various prejudices and bigotry. In the case of Jews of color, a colleague and friend of mine, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, said something a couple of years ago in a meeting that I have taken to heart deeply, which is, it's raining racism in America and all of us get wet. And I've thought of it over and over and over again, like, wow, I'm not a particular individual bigot. I'm part of this society that, I, as a white person, even though as Jews we sometimes feel sort of mixed about that, I have to realize that I grew up in this society, and what does that make me feel inside? And similarly, if you've grown up in a place where LGBTQ people were seen with fear or disdain or disgust, then you got to look at yourself and say, what's still in me about that? So look, I don't have all the answers, but I've learned some of these things over these years of a congregation that's pretty broadly engaging, and it keeps doing some of the work to keep making that happen, because we too are subject to the inner circle and just wanting to be together, and we have to watch that a little bit. So
I do want to make sure we talk about your HUC experience, because it was very different at the college than my experience. You were in New York, I was in Cincinnati after our wonderful year in Jerusalem, which we loved, and I loved so much. But we had very different experiences,
yeah,
and I was somewhat unaware. So could you share a little bit?
sure. Yeah, I think so. I sort of working front to back in a way, let's just say that HUCJIR changed its policy in 1991 about admitting openly LGBTQ students. Prior to that, people had gone through the program, um, I would say somewhat secretly. It's not that our classmates didn't know. It's not that even some of the professors didn't know. And I'm very grateful to the professors and the classmates who were allies at a time of feeling kind of institutionally in hiding. And so, a couple of things about it. On the one hand, we had wonderful essays. Well, we started with a wonderful class in Jerusalem, and so those that came to New York were wonderful, and wonderfully brave and kind of willing to step forward as allies, as we who were the gay students started to, begin to make inroads into opening up a little bit. And that's one of the things to remember and to say and to give them credit.
But this was all had to be done, outside of HUC.
Yeah, it sometimes meant in a discussion among the student and faculty body that one of the straight students would be the person who would stand up to ask a question about this policy, when those of us who were most affected by it didn't feel like it was safe to do that. That's what I mean. Now, that sometimes happened within HUC, but our organizing of a group that that began to push on the boundaries happened outside of HUC. And we would, it was before the internet, and we would pass little notes to each other and say, where's the secret meeting going to be? It was kind of, we laughed about that, the undisclosed location. So that's one whole piece. The other piece that I think I shared with you is that if anybody knows the HUCJIR building in Manhattan, you know that its first floor especially is a lot of glass. It has big windows and it has skylights when you walk in, and all of the classrooms, which are built on the outside of each floor, have lots and lots of windows. And my experience of this closet of my time at HUC is that the place has no windows. And I have to be reminded every time I go there now, every time I go back for an occasion when we can do in person occasions, I have to be reminded that indeed there are lots of windows in the space. It's been many years since my ordination, and the world has changed. HUC has changed. My life has changed. You know, many things have opened up, and it's been a long time since I had to live in that hiding space. But I do remember how strong that experience was of this place having no windows, and therefore being a little bit of a prison um, for somebody who couldn't see the light there.
Right.
And I think, I think some of my classmates and other students of other classes who had that experience would probably share something like that.
Yeah, I think it's painful to hear that, it's such a formative part of our lives. We spent 5 years at HUC studying to become rabbis, 4 in New York for you and 4 in Cincinnati after Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And that you had to, hide, and check something that was so fundamental to you and such a part of you, and is who you are,
Right.
you know, at at at, at the door, and to be careful of who you said what to, and to be guarded, when this is supposed to be a place that you're growing and figuring out what kind of rabbi you're going to be.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah,
that's
and leading prayer and giving sermons and doing all of those things as a budding rabbi. Um, yeah, it was not an easy experience. It's not. It certainly not. I'm not the only one, but it was not an easy experience, and I don't wish it on anybody. That's why when I come back to the congregation, it really was a kind of determining factor in starting the congregation and saying nobody's going to feel like that here. I'm not going to feel like that here, and nobody else is going to feel like that here either. Everybody's going to be able to, as we said, come as you are,
and
and as you fully are.
and to also to make sure that everyone can, no, everyone will feel welcome, and
Yeah,
that you can, yeah, and I 100% hear that. I mean, they said at HUC that the best sermon is the sermon that you give, to yourself. And so you
right.
couldn't give that sermon while you were at seminary until you created your own place.
Yeah, in
Uh,
some ways, I think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, HUC's policy did change in 91, but, the Jewish world was still a somewhat old-fashioned world in this way. And, it's the keeper of tradition, and there's, how it approaches modernity in all its many complexities is, remains a question. And but now there are so many communities that are have wide open doors in all kinds of ways. I'm really happy to see and to say and to be able to visit them. So
yeah, I think, synagogues are old-fashioned by nature because we are trying to preserve something,
yeah,
but
exactly.
also trying to change ourselves and change the world, and that is, of
Yeah,
course, the tension. We have come a long way, but there's still much work we can do.
always.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I'm thankful that no one has to have that same experience. But there are, more, subtle things that happen, that can be hurtful, that we still must change and still work on.
Yeah,
So, just because the law has changed doesn't mean that people's feelings have changed,
yeah.
or So that's what we have to work on. Look, Ellen, we have to wrap up. I want to thank you so much for sharing and for teaching us. I've learned a great deal listening to you. And so I'm grateful for our friendship of so many years and for you sort of reassuring me that one day New York will be home,
Yes,
which it now is. Look at that. So thank you very much for joining us. I
thank
look
you
forward
so
to
much.
more conversations.
Yeah, I do as well, and I hope you and everybody who's listening will have a wonderfully happy New Year and hopefully some more hope in 2021. So.
Absolutely.